Oh, hi. You're listening to Service from Hell, a podcast featuring people that are currently in customer service positions or the lucky few that got out and all of the good, bad, and infinitely irritating things that go along with that work. I'm comic and writer Kate Gaffney, and I'm uniquely qualified to discuss this as I used to work at a very busy and very popular comedy club in Los Angeles, and at least one of you listening right now has probably grabbed me and told me you were ready to order when I was running around like a crazy person. So let's eat. The landscape of podcasting has changed an enormous amount. Even one of my favorite podcasts, This American Life, has had to ask for subscriptions, which it did not have to before, because they made enough in ad revenue to cover all of their staff, and they no longer do. As is what happens with, sort of niche markets. A handful of people do really well in the beginning, and then celebrities get attached, or people with recognizable faces and or already established platforms jump into that space, and your limited bandwidth for consumption gets taken up by their podcasts or their shows. And that just seems to be what has happened. That's not to say, so first and foremost, for all of my Patreon subscribers that have kept me afloat for these past I think I started it 3 years ago. I can't express how grateful I am to you other than to say thank you so much. And that covered the cost of hosting the podcast for the past 3 years. It also covered Zoom when I needed it, when I was doing the show, when it was on Sirius. And I can announce publicly that Sirius never did pay for the show. That was a free service that we provided for them, for those of us who had podcasts on the platform. And that platform stopped hosting podcasts when all the lawsuits came forward, accusing a lot of major distributors, not necessarily Sirius, but others, of not paying their artists. And so they just quietly released all of their podcast providers and just said, well, we're not going to be in that space anymore. And where am I going with this? So first of all, Patreon, thank you so much. You really did. You were the reason that I was able to do this for 4 years. And, this started as a nugget of an idea back in 2017 and 18 when I started working at the Comedy Store, and I was so overwhelmed with just how a lot of my fellow staff were treating me, and also how the customers were treating me, how some managers were treating me. It was an enormously challenging time. My father had just passed away, and I was trying to do a customer service job. And as has been shared on this podcast before, I actually found out my dad died whilst I was bartending. And so, a lot of emotion was surrounding customer service for me and needing to talk about it. And the podcast space was relatively new to me. I wasn't consuming them as much as I consume them now. And television shows had yet to convert their their visual platform into an audio one, meaning Dateline didn't yet have a podcast at the time when I came up with this idea and released my episodes. And I think 48 hours, just all of the crime and horror, murder, porn stuff. They hadn't converted their television shows to audio consumption. And so it left a gap in the market. So it allowed for podcast providers and creators to be able to put our stuff out there. And you had more bandwidth with your podcast / media consumption, because podcasts are a great way to consume. You can be driving, you can be working out, you can be cleaning, you can be doing so many other things because it just requires your ears. And once the television shows started getting into that game, and then also once the handful of the viral podcasts started making $1 million ad deals, that changed everything for those of us who were in the small business market. And that is what this podcast is and is a small business that lost money every year that it was out. But I wasn't doing it for that. I was hoping that eventually I would have money to sustain me from the show. And we didn't break into that. And, that's not to say I'm not proud of the work and didn't speak to amazing, wonderful, lovely, fantastic humans. All of those things are true. I just never was able to break into the ad revenue side of things, and people had offered to help me, and I put together several pitch decks. I applied for grants. I applied for contests. I did as much footwork as I could do for something that was already consuming an enormous amount of my time for free. And to be frank, I got burnt out I was on some publicists' email lists as being a podcast that you should want to be on. And they would send me clients. And some of those clients were amazing and would cross promote and I am now friends with, and that is so lovely. And I'm so grateful for that. And then others just sort of viewed it as a vehicle to promote their album. They didn't cross promote and they just showed up, didn't know what the show was about and things like that. And I will just say, if you're going to be a guest on a podcast or really any form of media, but specifically a podcast and especially an independent podcast like mine is and was, you are tapping into our audiences when you are on a podcast, and you are tapping into the resource of not only their media bandwidth to consume information about you, but also to potentially gain a fan. And it's kind of a bummer if you're a guest on a show and then you are late or you don't promote or you don't know what the show is about or it's clear you've never listened. You can fake your way through that to a point, but I just think that I sort of got on that circuit of the automated, what would you compare it to? Kind of like a conveyor belt of podcasts that a couple places had just, said, oh yeah, you should be on this. And then come to find out the person that they sent me had never worked in customer service, or we could hodgepodge something together to make them fit into the format of the podcast. But it was clear that my show in that arena was being used as just a vehicle for them, and it wasn't a mutually beneficial relationship. And that started when the show was on Sirius and I was a vehicle for them to have a wider audience because Sirius has millions of subscribers. And once that changed, they still would give me guests, and like I said, some of whom were fantastic. But I just think that the slog and the labor of it labor of the show, I had the editing down to a science and I had things sorted on my side, but it was still laborious because I would do interview prep, and I would, most often with these comics, I would listen to their albums or watch their album or watch their special, I should say. And I would, try to give them a platform to discuss themselves. And I will say feedback that I got from some of my longtime listeners was, you can make the appetizer section shorter. We don't really need to know all that about them. We want them to get to the questions. And I changed it slightly, but largely I didn't, because I thought, well, I still want to give them this space to be able to promote themselves. And then if they wouldn't put the show in their stories, I was just like, okay, so my audience is telling me to change this, and I didn't, to give you a platform, and this is the result. Awesome. But like I said, it has been a labor of love, and I'm so grateful for all of the conversations I got to have. I've had some really, really poignant, wonderful, tear-inducing conversations. The most recent one that comes to mind, there are two. Amy Enriquez talked about her journey with disordered eating, and I got to talk to Caitlin Bailey about her journey with being a sex worker. And I have had, those are not the only two phenomenal conversations I've had. I've had so many. I'm only highlighting those because the depth of honesty was so beautiful and wonderful. And when I interview any of my friends, obviously, and then also interviewing people that I kind of only knew through other friends or through this podcasting world, when they're willing to get that vulnerable and that honest, and we get an amazing episode out of it, I'm really, really proud of that work. And I didn't have to do any heavy lifting at all on those particular interviews, on many interviews. But when I didn't have to do heavy lifting and the person could just be honest and talk about the ups and the downs, it was always really fun. And like I said, my friends, I can't shout you all out because I love you all so dearly. And anytime I got to interview a friend, it was so easy. And I would tell them, like, so many of my friends would have me over and like cook for me, or like, bring me stuff. Well, I can't, so many people, it was so lovely. And it got me to get to know people in a different way. And I'm not saying that this is over for good, because I know a lot of podcasters do that. And then they're like, just kidding, we're back for this anniversary show, or somebody picked us up. And I'm going to keep the episodes available. I might strip some of the more popular ones down and put them just on Patreon. But for the most part, the library of all of my interviews will remain up for at least another year. And so you can access everything and just hear these wonderful interviews and get to know these wonderful people. And I think that if the inspiration comes again, or, if it starts to be something that is profitable, or I could justify how much time it takes, then I will obviously circle back to it. And like I said, this is something I'm very proud of, and I'm very grateful for all of the guests, and I'm very grateful for all the subscribers and the longtime listeners. Even if you couldn't do the Patreon thing, which is understandable for everybody's different financial abilities at the moment or ever, I just appreciate a lot of you would listen and share and talk about it and tell your friends. And that is the only way that we really would get new listeners, because it's really hard to stand out in such a flooded market. And this is not to, speak ill of celebrity or to say that those people don't deserve a space to discuss how they feel as well. But this is how the independent film market ended up getting swallowed, is just when you have a behemoth, like, a mom and pop shop can't go up against Amazon. It's just not possible. You can't reduce your costs enough, and you don't have enough of a reach. And that is really how it started to feel in the podcast space over the last year and a half. It started to feel really, really flooded, and it started to feel largely flooded with recognizable faces. And understandably, if you recognize someone and you are interested in what they have to say, you're going to go listen to their podcast, and you only have so many available awake hours in the day to give to content consumption. And so it's totally understandable that you would head over somewhere like that, because that's interesting, especially if you're one of my friends. You already know me, but a lot of you would play my podcast a lot and listen, and I'm very grateful. And yeah, so this is not a goodbye. This is a indefinite pause. And for now, like I said, this content will live on these platforms, so you can still listen to old episodes for a while. And then within the year, we're going to kind of decide what to do next, because we pay for hosting for the year up front. So that happens in January. And so in January of 2025, I will probably most likely pay for this for another year, and then make a decision after that. So like I said, I'm going to keep repeating myself, because I am deeply grateful for all of your ears, and I'm so grateful for our Patreon subscribers, and I'm so grateful for those of you who shared this and told a friend. And we have a lot of international listeners, and we're really, really grateful for that too. I just think that the landscape of podcasting has very much changed. And, I read a lot about what successful people do, and successful people know when to put the sword down, and they know when to try a different idea. And my time is going to other avenues of, content creation and of consuming. And so, just based off of the landscape of podcasting and how much it's changed, and how many multi-million dollar deals are being handed over to just a select few, it's just harder to get ad money. This is not to talk anyone out of, by the way, if you have a podcast idea, this is not meant to talk you out of doing that. Still do it. There's still space, and nobody understands what's going to go viral or what's going to work. There really is no algorithm. Well, there's an algorithm, but there's no, blueprint or recipe for a guarantee of, if you do these 5 things, your podcast will work. I listen to a couple of podcasts that help you. They try to help you get more listeners and how to get ad revenue and things. And I know that it's possible with less than 10,000 downloads per episode, but, it's just a lot of work between the prep and the interview and the editing and the posting and the reposting. It's a lot. And so I am very, very grateful for all of the people that gave me their time and continue to give me their time and support and energy on this. And, I'm really looking forward to the future and trying to figure out what is next. It's interesting because a couple new friends of mine have DM'd me and said, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know you had a podcast," and they're starting to listen. And I'm like, well, so that's going to be it, So anyway, we're still going to do our holiday best of for the year, and we're still going to release for our Patreon subscribers all of your end of year bonus content. But I'm just giving you the gentle heads up. I have 1 episode still banked. Matt, you're such a rock star for being so patient. You've never bugged me about it. And his episode is coming. And so this is just sort of a placeholder interim episode to let you know that we're going to have Matt Lewis, and he'll probably potentially be my last guest of 2024 and might be the last guest of the podcast. So Yeah, we're just taking an indefinite hiatus, and we really appreciate you all. Please still do tell your friends. Like I said, this isn't necessarily a one and done and we're over it. We kind of have to decide what the future looks like. But again, with the podcast landscape changing so much and so aggressively, it's looking like there might be other mediums to explore. Just like, we said we were never going to do driverless cars, and now Waymo's all over Los Angeles. Who's to say? Who knows what the next phase is going to look like? But, now that someone saying, oh, I have a podcast is sort of a, I don't want to say a joke, but it kind of is amongst people in entertainment. I want to explore other options. So I really appreciate all of you. This has been such a fun experiment and a fun labor of love. And to all of my guests, and all of whom I couldn't list here, who are wonderful and who were skin unzipped, heart open, and really wanted to talk. I'm so grateful for all of you. And yeah, I think that's where we're going to leave it. Like I said, we're still going to do our holiday best of. We still have one episode left with Matt Lewis. And so, yeah, take a listen. And thank you so much for your thank you so much for your media bandwidth that you have given us over the last 4 years, because you do have a choice. And we're really grateful to have been any part of that. So, and by we, I mean me. I've been it the whole time. And so, yeah, it's just me. We were told to say we to sound bigger, but it was always just me. So I really appreciate all of you. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday season. And yeah, we're in it. Halloween just passed this past week at the time of recording this, and we're headed into the rush to the finish line for the end of 2024. So hopefully this year felt good for you and you did something that you were afraid of and feel good about what you contributed, because nobody's guaranteed any time on this earth. Okay. I love you all. I appreciate you all. Please feel free to slide into my DMs, message me, email me, call me, get in touch with me, and let me know how you're doing and your thoughts. Hopefully we will be back soon, but for now, this is an indefinite hiatus. And yeah, merry everything. Happy holidays. We love y'all. Thank y'all so much for listening. Also, if you can't afford to tip, you can't afford to go out. So don't be garbage and be good to people. It's easier that way. Lots of love, lots of hugs. Like I said, we got one more episode with a guest that you haven't heard yet, and then our best of. And then that'll probably do it for us here at Surface from Hell. Thank you all so much for listening. Good night.